So by way of introduction, my name is Anne and I'm a research funding manager in the population research team here at Cancer Research UK. But I've had considerable experience of talking to all sorts of researchers about how to get a grant and the types of funding opportunities that CRUK UK offers. So what are we going to cover in this session today? I'm going to talk you through, whilst I'm sure a lot of you know quite a lot about Cancer Research UK, I'm going to talk about our purpose as a research funder, the wide range of different types of funding that we offer, how the research funding process works at CRUK UK, and how to put together a great grant application. So firstly, a bit about CRUK UK. And the reason why we're going through this is because of the importance of knowing who your funder is. So our vision shows what our long-term goals are, to bring forward the day when all cancers are cured. So this is ambitious, but this is what we are overall, what we're always working towards. In terms of our mission, this is the way that we are going to achieve our vision, through early diagnosis, raising awareness, and researching groundbreaking science. So when you're coming up with your research idea that you're wanting to submit to a funder, it's really important to think about how are you going to help us achieve our vision, and how does your research idea fit within our mission statement. So you may well have seen our research strategy and seen this graphic within it about what we're trying to achieve. So aiming to see 3/4 of patients surviving cancer within the next 20 years. And again, think about how your research fits within this overall ambition for CRUK UK. As well, in our research strategy, we're a bit more specific about how we're actually aiming to achieve this. And this is where new opportunities arise for you as researchers. For example, greater investment in our funding committees, meaning more grants available, and new funding schemes that fund cancer research in new disciplines and act more quickly, getting the funding out to you for your brilliant ideas. And being able to support multidisciplinary collaboration and innovation in research as well. And a little bit about what we fund. So we are one of the largest cancer research funders in Europe. We fund right along the cancer pathway from prevention and early diagnosis to treatment. And our spend on some of the site-specific cancers is more than a lot of the site-specific charities put together. So we really do have this large scale and experience of working in the cancer research field. And as well as spending on research, we also spend quite considerable money on public health information and influencing public policy. And the reason why we're able to do this is because it's backed up by all the research evidence that is generated by the researchers that we fund. So that's a little bit about who CRUK UK is. And now I'm going to go on to some of the more specifics about our funding schemes. And we have an awful lot of funding schemes here at CRUK UK, and it would take far too long to go through them all individually. So what I'm going to do is to give you an overview of our funding, and I can pick up some of the specific questions in the Q&A session later. So leaving aside fellowships for the moment, if we were to plot our kind of committee and funding structure on a research pipeline, it would look something a bit like this. So for the more basic discovery research, we have the Science Committee and Population Committee grants. So the former includes basic biological research relating to cancer and preclinical studies underpinning therapeutic development. And the latter's remit involves clinical and health epidemiology and behavioural research relating to screening, prevention and early diagnosis. And then further up the pipeline, we have the New Agents Committee, which funds new anti-cancer agents and phase 1 trials. And then the Clinical Trials Advisory and Wards Committee, which funds phase 2 and phase 3 trials and sample collections. And then kind of running through all of this, we have other schemes looking at biomarkers, multidisciplinary research, and immunology as well. And the types of grants that we offer through this may be large-scale program grants, which are the ones that are aimed at established researchers. They often fund a suite of interrelated projects, probably around 5 years in duration. And then we have smaller scale project grants in certain research areas. These usually cover a single research question or hypothesis. They're usually around 3 years in duration and a smaller value in terms of costs. And these ones are available for early career researchers. So it is a slightly complex picture, but there is a lot more information on our website about all of these schemes. And another very important point that I'll be coming back to throughout this presentation is the importance of coming and speaking to us. If you're not sure what to apply for, you're not sure what's relevant, drop us an email or pick up the phone and we'll be able to help. So in addition to our project and program grants, we also have a lot of fellowship opportunities. And these are opportunities for you to really gain independent research funding and think about your training and your career development, as well as the actual research project that you'll be doing. And again, we can plot these along a career timeline as well. So the ones on screen at the moment relate to academic research careers. And you can see we have ones that take you from postdoctoral positions, in, like, for example, our population research fellowship and cancer prevention fellowships, through to lecturer stages such as the career development fellowship, and then more senior fellowships as well, leading on eventually to program grants. And we offer support for people who don't have any salaries through their research institution, and also those who you may, for example, have a funded lectureship, but you need support in order to be able to develop your own lab and bring in other researchers to work with you. We then have a separate set of schemes for clinicians who are involved in cancer research funding, which again offer clinical academics the opportunity to experience research at various different stages of their career, whether it's a research bursary to do a small research project, funding to do your PhD, or a clinician scientist fellowships, which is sort of the equivalent of postdoctoral funding. And again, these can go on to more senior posts and eventually move on to program grants as well. One thing to mention is that our clinical funding is currently undergoing a review, and so some of these opportunities, well, there may be more opportunities and some of these may change over time. So it's worth checking back in the autumn if this is something you're interested in, as there'll be more information about the new schemes at this time. Also, in respect to new schemes, there were several that were launched as part of our new research strategy last year, and I'll run through some of these. One of the really major ones that you may have heard of are our Grand Challenge scheme. And at the moment, what we're trying to do is identify some of the really big challenges in cancer research. And we're going to put an awful lot of money behind these to support large consortia of researchers coming together to try and address some of these challenges. And we expect that these will be on an international basis, that they will require working across a variety of disciplines. And in terms of timescales for these, our challenges are going to be announced in the autumn again. And then in the coming months, we're expecting consortia to start forming around these challenges. And one of them will get funded in 2016 with the scheme continuing in future years. Other exciting schemes that we launched last year include the Multidisciplinary Award, which funds project grants to support cancer researchers collaborating with physicists or engineers or computer scientists to try and address problems that you can't tackle just by one discipline by itself. And this has been extremely popular. It's currently on the second round of that. And so do look out for that scheme as well. Our Pioneer Award was launched last month. This is one that is designed to support innovation in research. So we're aiming to fund novel, exciting ideas that might be slightly more risky than what gets funded currently through some of our committees. We're funding it through a different route as well. So rather than a sort of a long lead-in time with external peer review and our standard committee model, it's going to be a shorter time frame with researchers asked to submit an expression of interest and then come and pitch, sort of Dragon's Den style, to an expert panel who will make the decision about funding. And then finally, our Programme Foundation Award sits within our sort of training and fellowship offering. And this is designed to bridge the gap between sort of finishing a fellowship and going on to get a full-scale programme grant. It's acknowledged that that was in the past a bit of a jump, a bit of a step up. So the Programme Foundation Award will help researchers to gain that experience of being a PI of a large team and taking on a programme. Okay, so the next section is about how does CRUK fund research. So for some of you, if you've submitted a grant already, you probably have had experience about this process and will know a lot of what I'm going to be saying. But it's worth going through because every research funder funds slightly differently. And it just gives you an insight about what happens once you've sent off your application and you don't hear for several months and what's going on with that process. So the first thing that happens is that you will probably contact us as a funder. We have a whole group of research funding managers like myself that look after different parts of the CRI UK remit and different funding schemes. And we can provide advice on whether you're eligible to apply, what the right scheme is, and also talk through your research idea and give you some help and guidance with that as well. We can look at your CVs as well and see how your career stage matches up with the type of application that you're aiming for, and generally talk you through the process. So we receive an awful lot of applications. They get submitted through our online grant system, which is called EGMS. And we know that online grant systems can be a bit complicated sometimes, but we think that ours is pretty user-friendly. We've got a lot of advice about how to use our online system, and we even have a dedicated grants helpline with people that you can ring up and get advice whilst you're trying to use the system online and putting your application in. And this online system allows us to manage all aspects of your grant through the application review process, and also anything to do with the financial aspects of your grant if it gets funded, and plus annual reporting and reconciliation mechanisms. And we communicate often with the grantees via this system. So once we've received your application, we will submit it to a few admin checks to make sure you've given us all the information we need. And then we send it out to review. We take peer review very seriously. It usually gets sent out to international experts. We want to make sure that the people reviewing your application are not conflicted in any way. And you are allowed to nominate peer reviewers for us to use and to say if there is anybody who shouldn't be reviewing your application. Once we receive the referees' reports back in, which all happens anonymously, so you don't actually know who's sending you the reports. These are collated and these will be sent to you so that you have an opportunity to review this feedback, potentially suggest improvements or changes to your research on the basis of that, or if you don't agree with some of these reviews, gives you the chance to rebut them or to explain in more detail some aspect of your study. And then what happens is that all of the applications, the peer review comments and your response to peer reviews, that all gets sent to the committee to the committee members who take all that information on board and use it as a basis for discussion in the committee meeting where the decisions are made. And the committee meetings may have different stages. So you may get, your application may get reviewed by an expert panel first and they recommend to the committee. It may go straight to a committee. There may be an extra stage involving an interview, particularly if you're a fellowship candidate. What usually happens in the committee meeting is that your application will be assigned to 2 or 3 designated speakers who will introduce your application to the rest of the committee and give recommendations as to its strengths and weaknesses and recommend as to whether it gets funded or not. And then everyone in the committee has the chance to comment on that application and make recommendations as to whether it should get funded. And also the applications will then get scored, so we have a ranking of the scientific quality of all the applications. Then when the funding decision is made, we then contact you and we'll provide feedback. Sometimes you may need to come back to us with further information. Sometimes it may be very straightforward and you're told that you've got the money for this proposal. So you can go ahead and do your research. Different schemes have different reporting requirements, so you may be required to submit an annual report so we can make sure that you are keeping on progress. And certainly for longer grants, there'll be, you'll have to submit a report and also submit an interim statement of the finances that you have spent to date. And then we like to keep in touch with our grantees throughout the research project, the lifespan of the research project. There may be opportunities to get involved with CRI UK and a whole range of different things, whether this is through public engagement, whether this is through helping to progress CRI UK's research strategy and take it in new directions. But it's particularly important for us to keep in touch with you because this helps us to refresh our funding schemes and to develop new ones to make sure that we have the right types of funding to meet the needs of our researchers, because we know that research is continuing to change and develop. So now I'm going to come on to what actually makes a good application. To start with, so before you even put pen to paper, there's a lot of planning that has to go on. So you want to identify the right funding scheme, talk to people in your institution who might know what's available, look online at all of the different funding agencies, what they have and what their timeframes are as well. So some schemes may only operate once a year, some may have 4 rounds per year. And you'll need to plan, because putting an application together is no small task and it can take several months. If you're putting together a large grant, you may want to start about 6 months in advance. So knowing when those deadlines are will help you to know when you need to kick off the planning event. So check your eligibility. Make sure that you are in the right career stage for any grant you're applying for. Make sure that you'll come from the right type of host institution. All of the schemes will have different types of eligibility criteria. Tailor your application to the funder that you are applying for. So it's not going to work if you copy and paste one application to one funder into another funder's systems. So you've got to make it fit the type of funder. So we're called Cancer Research UK, so therefore we will only fund research studies. They have to be related to cancer, and we predominantly fund within the UK. So we don't fund, if you come from an international institution, the majority of our schemes will not be able to fund you. But we still do get an awful lot of applications that do not fit our research remit, so do check these beforehand. And again, this is where it comes in, talk to the funder. We will be very happy to look through an abstract or a one-page summary of your research before you actually get into the nitty-gritty of putting together that whole application. So you know you're not going to waste your time if you've checked it with us in advance. And knowing your audience is really important, not just us as the funder and knowing about what our strategy is, but think about who are your peer reviewers, who is going to be on the panel and committee. So the peer reviewers are anonymous, but the panel and committee members, we publish these online, so you know the types of people that are going to sit on that panel or committee. The peer reviewers are likely to be experts in your field, so you probably know the type of people that are likely to be reviewing your research. They're not going to be your direct collaborators, but they're probably the types of people that you meet with and mingle with at conferences. The panel and committee are going to be broader in nature, so they are not going to be necessarily experts in your field. They're going to have broad expertise, but this tells you something about the way that you need to communicate your research proposal. If it's too technical, if it's too full of jargon, the committee's not going to understand what you are trying to do. So you need to try and convince the peer reviewers and the committee that you are the right person to be taking on this research, that you have the track record, that you understand the field in which you are seeking to carry out your research. And to make sure that you communicate all the aspects of your application clearly enough so that they understand the methods you're going to use, they understand the aims of your proposal, they understand your statistics, and that they are really excited and convinced by the novelty of your proposal. So, in terms of what actually to write, think about what's going to make you stand out from the crowd. So as I mentioned, some of our schemes get hundreds of applications and we can only fund maybe half a dozen grants out of that. So you do need to show, why are you the best person to do this work? Why is this the best time to do it? And what is the most burning question in this field? So show evidence that you're going to be successful in this. You can give preliminary data. Maybe you've done some pilot work. Maybe you've held focus groups if you're working with patients. Maybe you're moving into a different field. So in that case, how can you justify why you're going to be successful? What's the expertise that you're gaining from the collaborators that you're working with? And you need to justify everything. So why have you chosen these particular collaborators to work with? What are your contingency plans in case anything goes wrong? Have you thought about justifying all of the costs, the salaries, the research expenses that you need? Why have you chosen this particular methodology or this particular statistical analysis plan? Why have you chosen this particular model system to work with? Really sort of think through all of those aspects and make sure that you've convinced the committee about why you want to carry out the research in this particular way. And then once you've kind of got the main body of the research proposal, you get into the more administration aspects of the application. So here it's a really good idea to work with your grants office because they'll have had lots of experience within your research institution. There'll probably be people there who can help you cost up your application, whether this is in terms of all of the laboratory consumables you need, in terms of costing people's time if this is relevant, or anything else that you might need costed. The university has to check all these details anyway. They have to support your application, so it's in their interest to help you get it right the first time round. And then there's probably a lot of other paperwork that you might need to pull together in order to support your application, whether this is animal licenses, evidence of ethical approval, letters of support from other collaborators, information about other grants that you might be applying for, quotations for equipment. So all of these go into the appendices of the application. And don't underestimate the amount of time it can take to pull all this information together. Talk to your grants office in plenty of time to allow yourself to do this. And then just remember to really make sure that you're eligible to apply before you even want to start going through any of this process. Because as you can see, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, so you don't want to be turned away at the first hurdle. So in terms of what you're going to be judged on, what the panel and the committee and what we as a research funder are looking for is around the excellence of the scientific proposal. Is it going to be relevant to us as CRUK? Is it original? Is it novel? Is it really going to push this field forward? Or on the flip side, are there other people working in this field that are going to make what you are doing redundant? Is the experimental design appropriate? Are they actually going to be able to answer the questions that you're trying to address? Are the sample sizes big enough, and have you thought through the statistical power needed? We're also interested in, is this the right environment in which to carry out this research proposal? Do you have the relevant support from your collaborators? Do you have the access to the necessary equipment? And does the university sort of support your work in cancer research? And finally, you're going to be judged on yourself. So do you have the track record showing that you can deliver? Does your CV show that you can do the job? And particularly when it comes to fellowships, this is really important. We're trying to work out, are you going to be the next rising star in cancer research? So why do applications fail? And this is what we see from applications that come to our committees. It might not be relevant to the funder's strategic aims. We have some brilliant scientific proposals, but they don't show how they are going to improve cancer survival or prevent cancer incidence. There might have been no involvement of patients or consumers. A lot of our committees have patients that are committee members. So if what you are proposing is not going to be acceptable or feasible working with patients or working with the general public, then it's likely to not get through. We're unlikely to fund it if it's just a fishing expedition where there's no clear hypothesis. If there's no sound preliminary data to base the proposal on. We want you to be ambitious, but not over-ambitious. If you are trying to cram a 4-year research proposal into 2 years of funding, the people who are judging this are very experienced and they'll be able to know that it's more work than you are likely to be able to handle. If you can't show what the impact of the research is, so there will obviously be some direct outcomes from the research proposal you are working on, but how is that going to translate along that whole research pipeline? How is it going to benefit patients in the end? If you can't tell that story, it's unlikely to be able to show sufficient impact for the committee. And again, if it's poorly written, if it's poorly communicated, the panel or the reviewers are not going to be able to understand what you're trying to do. And again, you need to make sure that you really know where this proposal sits in the whole research landscape internationally, because if it's already been done, it's not going to stand a chance of getting through. So what we've also done, we went to our committee members to find out what for them is really key when they're looking at applications. A lot of our committee members, they put in grants themselves, so they're experienced grant writers, and a lot of them sit on more than one panel, so they don't just work for us, they work for other funders as well. And what they want to see is how your research proposal builds on existing knowledge. So this is using the available literature, providing preliminary data. Spend time on the abstract. That's probably the bit that you'll come to last once you've written the rest of it, but make sure it really clearly sets out what the aims of the proposal are, how you're going to go about it, and what the impact is going to be. Having said, showing that it builds on existing knowledge, don't get carried away. So your introduction should not be longer than your methods section, because you need to be able to explain clearly what you're doing. Tell the story as it goes through the application. Don't overcomplicate things, especially if you're applying for a project grant. You should be focusing on only 1 or 2 questions, so that you should be able to tell a simple story around that. Don't be long-winded or use jargon. Clarity is really key. As I said, these committee members, they're not necessarily going to be specific experts in your area. They're going to have broader expertise in that, and they have a lot of applications to read, so make it easy for them. And get the right team. So we know that applications in my population area, they will often fall down maybe because they haven't got a statistician on the team, or they might not have a public health expert, or they might not have a psychologist. So make sure you've got the right team around you. Not just as names on the paper, but ones who can help input into your application and make sure that it's all clear and accurate before it goes out to review. And as you can see, you need to start early. It's pretty easy for the committee to see when an application has been rushed. So this actually brings me to the end of how to get a grant. And now we'll hand over to you for any questions. And here's my details as well. So if you are not able to have your question answered here in this session today, then do feel free to take down my email and ask me at a later date as well. It's great to see some questions coming through. So we've got ones on combination therapy trials. Let me just come around this. So how much preclinical supportive information is required? This is probably something that is a bit specific for me to answer, because I don't work directly in combination therapy. But what we'll do is, for all of these questions, we can save them and we can take them to the relevant research funding manager to get you answers for those ones. I've also got a question about whether we consider running this type of webinar for a specific scheme. And we could certainly do that if there was enough interest that we could do one that's focused on a particular area of research, and get the research funding manager who works in that discipline involved. Yeah, so we're thinking about running some for the Grand Challenge, and also ones that are specifically around fellowships, so sort of more information about fellowship schemes. Okay, so I have a question about which is the best stream for phase 2 trials, whether it's NAC or CTAC. So for phase 2 feasibility studies, this would be CTAC, which would cover these ones. What happens as well is that the funding managers who look after the different schemes, we talk to each other regularly. So if something that comes in that is not completely clear where it sits on the border between NAC and CTAC, for example, or between the Population Research Committee and Science Committee, then we talk to our colleagues and take a decision about where that best fits. So we can help advise if you've got something that seems like it fits on the border. Oh, another question about what's the best way to keep updated about the deadlines. Yep, certainly on our website, we also have a researcher update newsletter that goes out once a month, and that also has all of the upcoming funding deadlines in that one as well. So if you're not signed up to that, then email your contact at CRUK and we can make sure that you're added to that update newsletter. We've come to the end of the questions, so we'll be signing out now. And again, thank you all for joining us.